Hello everybody, so welcome to Teh Tarik with Walid episode 43. So today I am delighted to have, it's the second time that I'm having somebody on for the second time. So the first time was Professor Chiran George who came on twice, and today I will have NMP, former NMP, Anthea Ong on, and she's gonna bring some backup as well, Dr. Rayner and Sophie, and they are going to discuss together with me this book, and I just finished reading it just now, and it is really a must read for everyone interested in Singapore politics, every student of Singapore politics. This is really a must read, and there are some fascinating chapters, and I really recommend. I believe this is only $25, and it's not much more than that. So I bought it for $25 at least at the book launch. I don't know whether it was a discounted price, but anyway. So I really recommend this book to everybody. Please get it, and for my students, if you have some financial issues, I'm happy to buy one for you if you are willing to read. Okay, so I will invite them on, and then they will discuss uh, the the book together with me. Uh, and this is also the first time that I'm having four people on at the same time. So or three together with myself. So be kind, okay? There will be some technical difficulties. Yeah, okay, wonderful. So thank you all for joining me tonight. And firstly, congratulations on the book. I have finished reading uh, every single page, yes, and it's really fun. It's a fun read and it's an easy read, but easy reading means difficult writing, right? And I'm sure difficult editing. Oh, Pritam Singh has just joined us, so welcome. So I'm sure they are here for you, Anthea, and for Rayner and Sophie as well. Okay, so I wanted to start by each of you telling me more about the book and how what it meant to you, what was the process like, and so Anthea, you were the editor, and then Sophie and Rayner, you can hello, Mr. Pritam Singh. So you guys can share what your experiences were and what your involvement was as well. And maybe if Pritam is still listening, I want him also to just in the comment section, if I could request, just type his thoughts on the NMP scheme as well. But Anthea, shall we begin with you?
Uh, Walid. Well, what was the experience like? It's a 15-month journey, labor of love. And I think it really started with the idea that there hasn't been a book of this, this sort. In fact, there hasn't been a book at all on NMP scheme other than academic text and commentaries. But at a personal level, it really came from a place of just this deep gratitude and privilege that I have. Having been able to sort of serve in Parliament in that capacity, and this book was that expression is an expression of that deep gratitude and privilege that I still feel actually today.
Right.
Yeah, I'll let Rayner and Sophie chime in a little bit more. So I can't thank them enough. As I said at the launch, Walid, you were there. The two people I missed most that day were them, and now we have them here. They've really been with me almost from the very beginning. In terms of just sort of being part of the team, the research, the project management, the kind of the editorial, brainstorming, a lot of chasing
Right.
of the 90s. So yeah, let's hear from them. I think it's more interesting because what I feel about the book is in the prologue and stuff anyway. So let's hear from Rayner.
Yeah. Thank you. Anthea, are you standing up? You're
Yes.
making me a bit stressed. Yeah. So I feel like I need to stand up also, but I'm wearing my sarong, so
So like, imagine going to after boom and and you're just sitting down. No, I tend to.
Okay, very, very intense, very intense. So I wanted to really I think the most important thing, or amongst one of the most important things is the diversity in this, and I don't just mean gender and ethnic diversity. I really mean intellectual diversity, which I think is the most important form of diversity. And you managed to get NMPs from every parliament since the scheme was introduced, which was amazing. I don't know how you did that. I can imagine there would have been a lot of emails and badgering and WhatsApp messages.
A lot of badgering lah. I mean, I think it was very important, I think, from the very get-go, and you absolutely hit it on the nail, Walid. I think the book really needs to be one that is introspective, which is why it is really not just commentaries from each of the NMPs. I think you said it's an easy read. I think part of it is because you're reading someone's personal reflection, right? Very relatable, and that helps with that. So introspective is one, instructive is another, and so we'll get Rayner and Sophie talk a little bit about some of the appendixes that we put in, but also generally it's supposed to be instructive of what the scheme is about. And last but not least, inclusive. So from the get-go, it was very important that we have at least an NMP represented from each of the 8 parliaments since the scheme started. I lucked out on the first one, Walid, with Morris, because there were only 2 of them.
Exactly.
And one of them has passed on. And if I could not track down Professor Morris True, then we would have actually missed one parliament session.
Right.
NMP. But let's hear from
Rayner. Let's Rayner, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay. You can hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for me, just being able to talk to and interact with all the NMPs and the contributors was like a really meaningful kind of journey for me, because you've only seen everyone kind of like on the newspapers, on the TV screens, and then it's like, when you talk to everyone about their experience and the kind of like topics and the stuff that they were advocating for in Parliament and outside of Parliament actually, and the road leading to that, I thought it was like super inspiring. For me, I was also really interested in the data part, and the funny thing is, I guess we didn't actually think of an appendix D earlier on.
Right.
We were just like kind of like, okay, let's see what might be interesting. That's why it's still called fun facts and figures, because it's fun facts and figures, but it's become like a whole thing now.
It's very fun, Rayner. And I just wanted to, I'll reveal the answer later on, but the first person who manages to guess who is the NMP who has asked most questions, right? In their parliamentary session, the first person who manages to guess that, I will give a free copy of this book, okay? So just type out your comment. But I really learned, Rayner, I really learned a lot from the appendix, and I am relatively well informed about politics, but still there were many things that were new to me, or really it hit me in a different way, and Appendix D was super fun, I have to admit. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, not at all. I think it was just like a really fun process as well, working with Sophie and like Anthea, and being able to go we went into the library, right, to go and look at like media articles and also like look for things online. Parliament library, actually, to be specific. So it was an experience. Yeah, very, very grateful to have had this experience together with this wonderful team.
Right. So Sophie and yourself helped Anthea with the researching and editing. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also a part of the Q&A, the editor's cards that
right.
I say that was also very small. I really wanted that we don't just know about their views and contributions at a customer level, but also know some of this behind sneak peeks, right?
Right.
So Rayner and Sophie also helped in a big way, and Sophie, we kind of split that up. In no particular order or preference. But that was it was fun process. I mean, Rayner made it sound fun, but it was actually very onerous, even with Appendix B. But even it was onerous, right? It was onerous because these folks are just packed schedule. You know, they don't have a white space at all on their calendar,
Yeah.
and kind of work around them and making sure we can meet deadlines and all of that. Yeah. So Sophie can share maybe a little bit about her experience.
Yeah.
The editing part, yeah.
Sophie, yeah.
Cool. Hope you guys can hear me. It's a little bit noisy
Yes.
where I am, so hoping there's
Yeah,
not a lot of background. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so the Q&As was really interesting. I mean, so Rayner and I kind of split that between us, right? We got the NMPs to start working on their essays, and then kind of parallel to that, we did a lot of Zoom calls, essentially. And I think that was particularly interesting because, so we decided kind of fairly early on that we would have like a standard set of questions that we'd ask everyone, you know, and then just kind of work from there. And I felt like what Rayner was saying, because their essays talk a lot, you know, about particular topics that they, you know, brought up in Parliament, the causes they championed. I think it was especially in the Q&As that they went into the mechanics, you know, and some of like the more relational aspects, right, that they may or may not have touched on in their essays, but couldn't go
Right.
as into depth. Yeah, that was what was particularly interesting for me. I think Anthea mentioned earlier that we wanted the book to be instructive, right? And obviously this is not like a how to be an NMP manual.
Although it would be useful for someone who was gonna be an MP, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely,
It's
yeah.
And I see a big part about instructive. And you read the chapters, Walid. I think coming in without institutional support or the party,
yeah.
and as you know, NMPs are the MPs that are not providing secretarial support compared to the other MPs in Parliament. It's a deep end, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter where you come from, or you know, you're a professor or you are a business person like me, you know, from the people and civic sector. It's still a deep end that you get into, and I think we're hoping that this book, I mean, you know, it's not a structured resource book or guide, but I think just hearing the experiences hopefully gives a glimpse of what it means, what it might look like,
Right.
you know, the journey ahead for an incoming NMP, but also for foreigners
Yeah.
to know how they can serve and not think that this scheme is shrouded in mystery and only certain people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You know, absolutely. I think I was reading one of the uh early NMPs, and I can't remember who now, but they mentioned that at, at the start, I mean the PAP MPs didn't really talk to them, the opposition didn't talk to them, and even the NMPs didn't talk amongst each other at that time, which I thought was fascinating. And I guess you are also each NMP batch is building on the experiences of previous batches as well. So which is why I think this is such a useful resource. So even though Sophie says it's not a manual how to be an NMP, but if I were gonna be an NMP, which I'm not, but if I were, I would read this cover to cover. You know, I think
yeah.
it would be so useful. Yeah.
According to Chandra Mohan Nair, and so the early batches, for sure, they are kind of in no man's land, right? And maybe
Right.
even child, so to speak. Yeah, because I mean, you know what happened with the bill being debated. That's going to be one of the most heated, testy debates. And as I said at the launch, it's a very riveting read on her part.
Right.
Actually, opposition came from the PAP and government MPs themselves
Right.
on the scheme, right? Because many of them thought it was an indictment on their performance. So I think the early batches of NMPs, were a bit lost lah.
Right, right. So, there are a couple of answers. So I think, like a boss said, Anthea with 92 PQs. Is that correct? 92. Anthea is the answer is correct. Anthea is number one. Is it 92? Let me check. Oh yeah, it is.
I
Okay,
have
so well done.
It is.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it is 92 per year. Because
Per year,
like the
correct.
NMPs had like
Yes.
different numbers of years that they
Yeah,
serve,
this
so we
is
had to like standardize it lah.
this is per year, and so Arun went one step further and said Anthea, Walter, and Kanwaljit were the top three, and he is right as well. So I owe both of them a book. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions, right? And again, I really recommend this. It's $25, right? Or that was just a book launch price.
it was.
Okay.
I think the paperback is 35.
Okay, still very affordable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I 40 for sure.
Right. Okay.
Hardcover, I think it's like 65.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
around.
So I wanted to give a shout out to World Scientific also for doing a very good job with the book, and also for supporting scholarship on Singapore politics in general. I think they have done a great job. So maybe we get to some of the harder questions first, right? So, and this is for all three of you. So when I was reading the book, right, the book is really a list of who's who of Singaporeans, right? Like really the elites, right? You're talking about Brema Mati, Kanwaljit, Anthea herself, Walter, Eugene Tan, you know. But isn't that precisely the criticism towards the scheme, right? It's by the elites, it's for the elites, it comprises the elites.
What? I mean, the two of them are looking. Okay, I will go in, and then Rayner and I'll go first. Rayner and Sophie can chime in. I think it's not the most the most critical thing about the NMP scheme. It's definitely not the biggest criticism of the NMP scheme, because if you think about the elite, it's not just the NMP scheme. I mean, if you think about it, entire August Chamber of Parliament,
yeah.
and the government and the cabinet as well. So, but I do think there is an opportunity for us to look at, how the NMP scheme can actually augment this very entrenched system of governing elites. All right, and that's actually both on the ruling party and the opposition side, where we have elites, and that's a start, right? That NMP scheme could actually have the potential to actually bring in and appoint, reappoint, because I think the electorate are the ones who choose this elite system, right? Because they are voted by the electorate. But then the NMP scheme, since it's not an electoral system, then we can actually consider NMPs representing, the other non-elite segments of the society. I also want to say and qualify that when you say, this, I don't think, well, I mean, depends on how we define elites, right? A big part of, this, and you think of them as elites. For example, Maurice, the first NMP, was telling me he was just a young 37-year-old doctor, right, with approach, right? And because over time, obviously, he's now obviously the chair of Farrer Park Hospital, and he's also been academia and all. So there's also this sort of evolution and time component that we also need to, take into account when you talk about, this is a who's who list. Like the way we know about Kanwaljit Soin over the years, or Walter Woon and all of that, is because over the years they have stepped up and spoke up, and so they seem to be known. So it depends on how we define elites.
Right.
But I think that elites are necessarily bad. I think we just need to be mindful. In fact, I think because you have the privilege to have gone through that whole process that allows you to be an elite, then the more you must exercise that privilege with responsibility to come forward to serve.
Okay.
And so, that are not in the same segments or communities as you. What do you think, Rayner and Sophie?
I guess I also agree, like, what's the definition of elite? One thing that my head actually goes to is, what is advocacy, what is activism, and I think, like, what I am thinking is that, at least based on my own experiences and what I've seen, like, it takes place in all different levels, right, of society. And, I think that's why it's so important when it can entrench elitism, I think, as an institution. But I think, like, the important thing is to really use that position to advocate for causes, to use the opportunity to advocate for causes that are important to civil society and the population at large, right? And I think that's where you kind of like share that power, and you kind of like leverage that privilege to not be an elite in that term,
Right.
that I guess that connotation that we're thinking about right now.
Right. Oh, excellent. Sophie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like what Anthea said, the elitism criticism, at least I personally haven't found, maybe I don't know if Anthea and Rayner agree, that this isn't like the biggest thing the scheme isn't criticized for. A lot of that tends to come with how it's been designed, excuse me, especially with regard to like the selection process and how that's not very transparent, things like the functional groups. I guess two things from me in that regard would be, so the functional groups part is actually quite interesting. Appendix D is Rayner's domain, so maybe he can talk a little bit more about that later. But I think one interesting thing we noticed was that over time, there were more independent applications kind of coming in, right? So moving away from, this idea that, you have to have come from this particular like background, this particular sector, so that, and the applications have been increasing over the years, right? I think this last batch had 61, maybe like the highest ever number, so definitely, I think more people are recognizing that, you don't have to have made it, right, in order
Right.
to think about what you can contribute. But also that, like both Anthea and Rayner said, I think a lot of the NMPs, especially, and this came out during their Q&As, felt that, being in Parliament was a privilege, and that this was something that they actively wanted to use to like leverage causes, right? It weren't, sort of just in there to talk, right? And in fact,
Right.
they talked about how a lot of talking goes on outside of Parliament.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
in terms of having the individual expertise, I think Professor Lim Sim Sun talks a bit about this in her Q&A, specifically to do with academic expertise. All that they found actually also complemented their experience. It gave them a little bit of credibility, and vice versa.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And what I would just add is that an elite doesn't have to be elitist, I think. I think an elite is just the privileged position that you are in, right? What can you do with that, right? But being an elitist is an attitude. So I don't think, I mean, if the NMP scheme is they're full of elites, so what, right? I mean, the entire parliament is full of elites, right? In many ways, like many of us here are privileged enough to be elites in some way, right? But what matters is whether we are elitist. And I think we reference Appendix D a lot. So it says fun facts and figures, and there are all sorts of facts, right? The gender, racial composition, and then by sector, and number of bills spoken on, motions, budget debates, and so on. And what are the adjournment motions that were passed? So all 26 of them that were spoken on by NMPs rather. Yeah, so it's very fascinating that Appendix D, right? So what are some elaborating on Appendix D, what are some of NMP's biggest contributions? Like maybe for you guys, like what throughout the research of your book, right? What really came to your mind? Maybe one or two, a couple, and hopefully we do not all of us can, it can be different. So all four of us will go in any order. Well, so which one do you think was the standout moment for NMPs?
Hmm.
Well, I'll go with the easy one first, because I'm the oldest here, and it is late, and just while mine is still lucid, very clear that you know, and I mentioned this at the launch as well. Walter Woon's private members bill, right, on the Maintenance of Parents Act. That's his legacy, but also I think in some way an NMP legacy, and everyone knows about it. You know, and that's important to say that that's. I mean, to actually table a private members bill is incredibly difficult. I mean, he's a law professor and all of that, so maybe that makes it a little bit easier.
Right.
But it's incredibly difficult, and in fact, the history of our parliament. There have only been like 3 or 4 private members bill, and I might even be already overstating it, right? So that's one, but it's also not the only one that's been tabled by NMP. Kanwaljit Soin actually tabled one on family violence as well. That didn't get passed, but many of the proposals within that bill eventually actually got introduced into the amendments for Women's Charter, right? And also the Protection Against Harassment Act. So POHA. So I think those are kind of very straight out factual contributions from NMPs. I'm gonna pass it over to them to talk about others. You say 2, right? I mentioned 2 already, but
Yeah.
there are
So,
others.
Sophie?
I think a particularly interesting episode for me, and this gets touched on a lot in the book because we had a number of NMPs from that batch, was the population white paper debate.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, you know, even though you know, that motion passed, right? I think there were I lose track now. 3 abstentions.
Yes.
From
no,
that
no.
batch. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, one abstention. Only
What?
Jun Tan abstained.
Oh yes,
But
Yes.
three no's and then the absent. Yep.
Correct, yes.
My bad.
So
Yeah.
Lawrence Lian
Lawrence,
wrote,
Jack, Faiza.
and
Lawrence,
Faiza. So
five, yeah.
Lawrence's chapter was really fascinating, and he even talked about how there were pressures against the NMPs who voted against. And really, so this is not like this book doesn't sugarcoat history at all, you know. So it's really, there is really a lot of counter hegemonic stuff inside as well. Yeah. So yeah. So sorry, Sophie, you were saying, yeah.
Oh no, yeah, I just brought out that that episode because, like, of course, you know, the motion overwhelmingly, you know, got, I mean, you know, on a pure numbers basis, it was going to get that. But I think it was really interesting and important, right, that you had NMPs kind of going on the record to say, like, no, you know, we disagree, and this is not coming from a place of where it's not coming from an uninformed place, you know, or disagreeing for the sake of, but on a very principled basis, kind of standing up to say why, you know, why they felt this wasn't good for Singapore, and putting it on the record that you can actually have this sort of debate, right, where you can come, you can, maybe you should dissent on things, you know, if you have a good reason for it, and it doesn't have to be you know, something that's what's the word for it, you know, that dissent like this is constructive. I think this was an excellent demonstration of that. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So I think that was, I guess it's also under discussed, that particular episode, the fact that 3 NMPs voted against. Yeah. Thank you, Rayner.
So like one thing that I actually like, and you know, something that's in like the appendix D that we keep you know, bringing up also, is that we did go back in time, right, to see like comparisons between NMPs, elected MPs, and actually I like did this time sort of series tells a little bit of a story. Like, I'm just looking at the PQs, for example, right? And you see like out the gate, like, wow, like average PQs by NMPs is like this high, and
Yeah.
like elected MPs is like here, but then after that you see the elected MPs like bars are like like, and it kind of comes after the NMPs also. So
Right.
like as you're doing it, you kind of wonder what's the backstory behind all the data, right? And we might not know what's going on, but then at the same time, you actually see all these patterns change, and you think to yourself like, wow, there's so many exciting things that could be happening, behind the scenes. So that's what came to me. I think right now you see that, wow, okay, like the MPs, I think they ask really a lot of PQs nowadays, right, compared to last time. And
Yeah.
I think Anthea being like the top performer in terms of PQs, like you also start to see some MPs asking even more. But at the same time, reading through and kind of being part of this book project, you also see the kind of support that is given to elected MPs versus NMPs, and how all these things tie into some of the statistics that you see out there. So like you can appreciate how hard maybe someone has to work, whether it's an elected MP or NMP, based on the kind of contact that they have.
Yeah, I think that theme came out at least 3-4 times throughout the book. The fact that NMPs are not supported enough. Like even very early on, this was discussed in Parliament by one of the NMPs talking about how NMPs should have more support. So Arun mentioned Anthea and Walter abstaining from voting in the parliamentary motion against WP MPs, which I thought was super courageous, and it was really a vote based on principle, especially the reasoning that was given. Like this was this ventured in the realm of the political, and it wasn't the position of NMPs. I thought that was brilliant. So for me personally, I would say the POFMA vote, again Anthea and Walter, the usual suspects. As Anthea has been called troublemaker, right? And Vishwa's speech on race.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So yeah, and it prompted former Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew to actually stand up after about 2.5 years. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. So that episode, I think, is well documented. What I didn't know was what he mentioned when he met Mr. Lee later on. So Mr. Lee asked him, "Are you still causing trouble?" or something like that, and then he said, "Well, I try to," and Mr. Lee just said that, "Oh, it's better to be respected than to be loved," something like that. Yeah.
To be respected, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So almost, yeah, Karen.
I just add in, I think the other bit that we mustn't also forget in terms of the contribution from the NMPs would be the arts NMPs, right? I think since Audrey Wong, who's the first arts NMP per se, and the arts community going through that process within the community to select their choice. I think that's really allowed, lots of these issues in terms of funding and engagement with the arts community to be discussed in Parliament, right? Otherwise, those issues always seem to be seen as, oh, it's not important, not bread and butter.
Yeah.
And certainly those are the issues, especially within the arts community, that it's very unlikely you get to see elected MPs from both sides of the house to want to bring them up, right? So I think the arts NMPs have definitely made a huge contribution over the years. The likes of Janice and Audrey Wong. And
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the other thing about the arts community, they also have their own selection process, right? Which ultimately the select committee can choose to disregard, and they have disregarded even in the latest round, right? But I think it's quite interesting that the arts community is putting their candidate out there, right, through this more democratic process. So yeah, I definitely agree that that is another sector that people will not talk about as well. And I think, Anthea, you also, together with, I suppose, Louis, brought up migrant workers, which was completely not an election issue, right? So it means that, yeah, the opposition and the government also didn't. So there are many other such issues that that were brought up that are not electoral winners, but
Yes.
NMPs are better positioned to bring them up.
And that was the same with LGBTQ. If you think about Siu Kam Hong,
Right.
right? Putting forth a parliamentary petition to repeal 377A. And again, as you said, right, these are issues that have cost to the elected MPs, again, on both sides of the House.
Right.
And that's part of, one of the flaws of a majoritarian democracy, right? That, to be elected MPs, you got to go for the votes, right? And
Yeah.
then go for more majority interest issues. And minority interest issues tend to, go on the weak side. I'm not saying that the MPs don't care about them, but I think in the, in the need for partisan politics and getting the votes at the ballot box, then this get compromised.
Yeah. So there's a question by Sean here. So to all three of you, which batch of NMPs, in your opinion, is the most memorable? So I'm just gonna add a caveat to the question: which batch of NMPs other than Anthea's batch is the most memorable? So you can think about it. I mean, because you guys are the subject matter experts on this, right? So you guys really know this
It's
issue inside out.
easy for, I must say that it would be definitely the, I think it's the 12th, or was it the 13th Parliament? And so it's the Parliament with Lawrence, Eugene, Janice Cole, Faiza, right? I think, well, partly because of the population white paper, and what they did and all of that. But I think that's also the batch just after the 2011 elections. And some call that the watershed election, right? And so I think just the kind of issues that, Singaporeans, people want to discuss, want to be raised. I think the NMPs in that batch, in that parliament, did a wonderful job raising a lot of this, whether it's Lawrence talking about social recession, Jenny's talking about censorship in the arts community, Faiza obviously, in the wilderness of parliament, trying to get everyone just want to talk about GDP, and productivity. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't trendy then, but she was pushing for it when, we were looking at population, increasing population and sacrificing a lot of the reserves and our green spaces. So I think that would be, for me anyway, a really memorable batch of NMPs.
Yeah, and that batch had many memorable stories documented here as well. So one of them was by Faiza when she was talking about breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And she said later on, some of her male colleagues were basically mocking. I mean, she didn't use that word, but it seemed like they were mocking her. And her response was, "What's so funny? Or why you don't breastfeed?" Is it like? And I found that to be so witty. And I mean, I guess it was in the spirit of her entire contribution and time in Parliament as well, together with that batch. And of course, Eugene as well. Professor Eugene Tan was always calling the MPs out for not attending Parliament, essentially. Yeah, so.
Much. I love that. The quorum, he's always checked on whether we have a quorum because it could be constitutionally challenged.
Right.
Right? That a law that we pass, but actually, to be fair, it's true. No one's really checking that, right? Because we're not doing a call for division all the time, obviously.
Right.
And yeah, and because he's a constitutional scholar, I want to make sure that the laws that are passed are actually constitutionally sound. I thought that batch was really quite an outstanding batch of NMPs.
Yeah. So Rayner and Sophie, any other batches stood out for you?
I was going to say the same batch, but actually, okay. So for me, I speak more from as I was reading through the chapters, I felt like I was going to cry as I was reading like let's say like Faiza's chapter, right? You know, because like I got emotional because I just felt like it was so honest and raw around like, you know, how vulnerable one can be in that position. You know, like I think there was one quote in there where she's talking about like, you know, there was a media storm, you know, after voting no to the white
Yeah.
paper, and then after that, you know, she just posted a quote on Facebook about, you know, speak the truth even if your voice shakes. You know, and that for me was like, oh my gosh, right? You know,
Mm.
like it's a level of vulnerability, and I can identify with that. You know, like sometimes you like when you're trying to post, you know, things that are, you know, you feel like passionate about, but you know you're afraid of what people might think. You know, just very very identifiable, and you know I felt that vulnerability there.
Mm, beautifully.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sophie?
Yeah, I was gonna say the 12th as well. Rayner and Anthea basically said everything that I wanted to say. Um, but I think you know, this said because I think I did a number of the interviews with some of the MPs who were in the earlier batches. So like Dr. Maurice Chu, I spoke with Professor Simon Tay. Rayner, I think, might have done like Brahma Mati and Chandra Mohan, but I think you know, I think reading their accounts, I think that also stood out to me because those were still like the relatively early days, right? I think a number of them were quite candid in that they themselves are figuring out like what they were supposed to do, right?
Right.
And what sort of dynamics they were working with, right? And I think even during that time, public awareness of the NMP scheme was nowhere near what it is now, and it's still
Yeah.
probably not great, which is why we did this book. You know, but I think like Professor Simon Tay, he talks about the transboundary haze motion
Yeah.
that he brought up in Parliament. You know, we've spoken about Professor Woon's Maintenance of Parents Act, Dr. Soin's Family Violence Bill. You know, so I think it's worth saying that even though, you know, not all of those might have been very well remembered or got a lot of attention, I think it's worth, you know, saying that these were done sort of when the scheme was even newer and to some extent maybe working even under more constraints than future NMPs, you know, had eventually.
Well, I completely agree, Sophie. So, and I also just to build on your point, probably during the early years, the NMPs, it was much harder for them. I presume that they were not taken as seriously as NMPs are now by their parliamentary colleagues as well. I can imagine. And Simon Tay, well, that's an interesting one because the two chapters that really stood out to me, right? I mean, there are so many, but the one that I learned a lot from, because Simon T was quite some time ago. So his one was one that I really, and for instance, when he mentioned like he voted together with JB, right? And JBJ. So I mean that, especially at that time, that was not the easiest thing to do for an NMP. So yeah, that's another must read chapter. Yeah, so thank you for that. So and building on what I just said and what you guys just said. So during the launch, ESM Go, by the way, what a launch it was. You got ESM Go, Speaker Tan, but the star of the show was a 13-year-old girl
Right.
who was superb. Like, and I was thinking, my God, at 13, I don't think even at 30 I was that eloquent.
I would
Yeah, she was good. She was really good. ESM Go actually mentioned in his speech, but he was being a bit whimsical, I know. So, but he said that the NMPs rarely ever agree with the government. Is this true? I find the fact that Anthea and Walter's vote, and Faiza and Lawrence and Janice's vote, I mean, they come to mind precisely because most of the time it seems to me that NMPs do go along and do not challenge as much. So the instances where there are challenges, right, it sticks out. So, but you guys have the data. So Am I right, or am I misreading the situation?
Yeah, I thought that was a very cheeky question. And actually, speaker turned to me and said, I think I agree with him. I said, are you sure? You know,
Oh, okay.
no, then I think he was also being cheeky, right?
Okay.
So first and foremost, I would have to say, right, we forget sometimes what is the role of parliamentarians, right? To be in parliament, one of the key roles is there to check on and hold the government to account, right? So we're not there necessarily. I mean, and it's not just the individuals I'm talking about, just the system and the institution on its own. With the three-branch government that we have, right? Parliament is supposed to be, checking and scrutinizing the government, right? And holding it to account. So I think if there are, you know, if there are challenges like you mentioned, then that's kind of should be, business as usual in Parliament.
Right.
But as you also said, I mean, you're saying that, and I think that's probably also one of the criticisms that has come out, for the NMP scheme is, should NMPs be pro or not pro government? And I don't think that's the right way to ask a question, right? And whether I know, like you said, I mean, and ESM was being whimsical in that. But I don't think the point is that NMP should be agreeing with the government, that all intentionally against. But the role of parliamentarians, whether government MPs, opposition MPs, or NMPs or NCMPs, should be to check on, and hold the government to account. I think we didn't go that in depth, but Rayner can respond to that. We certainly didn't go to the content. We talked about it at length, about how deep can we go in terms of the issues, in terms of, the quality, right, of the contribution in terms of speeches and PQs and all of that. But it was, onerous. I don't think we couldn't get into that. Right, Rayner?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot, for a start. I think, like just to construct this whole data set, we had to go not just because we compare NMPs and MPs, right? So we didn't just have the NMP data. We had to construct every single
Right.
MP as well. So I
Right.
think that was something that we were trying to get to, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sophie, anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, well, this is our pitch. If anyone would like to keep working on that data set, please do, because like Rayner said, I think getting the numbers, like the quantitative aspect, that was a lot. One thing we really wish we could have done was also to look at the quality of participation, like he said, like what sort of issues are getting brought up more or not getting brought up, right? Who is bringing them up? So definitely I think there's a lot of room to scrutinize that, both for elected MPs, NCMPs and NMPs. I guess this is not really so much about the should they agree or disagree point. Maybe it's slightly different, but I mean, in fairness, looking at the data, if you go back to Appendix D, we did look at like participation across NMPs, right? And I think whether or not they agree or disagree, it is true that there are disparities in performance. Whether they were agreeing or disagreeing. I mean, we did find, and we had MVPs right, who said a lot, and you had people who didn't really say very much. Let's put it that way. We may even have found a couple who said nothing at all. So kind of.
We also found MPs who said nothing at all, by the way.
Right. So elected MPs who said nothing.
So yeah, I think beyond the should they agree or disagree.
So
that's correct.
Like Anthea said, that's not the point.
I think you would see that in some of the editors' cards, the Q&A. I think some of the NMPs alluded to the fact that it's not right to step forward, take a seat out of the 9. And this didn't come from me. I didn't actually say that, but some of the NMPs did say that it's important that you actually make good that sacred, voice. And so, Rayner and Sophie are right. There is definitely the disparity, between and amongst NMPs, but also, also with the too, right? The difference is, I guess, most people think that, well, elected MPs in terms of the performance, the best evaluation is through whether they get re-elected, right? And so people don't necessarily ask as many questions, but because NMPs are elected, which is why we thought it would be instructive at least to put out the such data has not been done to date. Which is why, we started with the quantitative part of it, but there's a need to go deeper, so that we can understand more, and it informs how to actually enhance the scheme, whether or not it becomes irrelevant in time to come, but while it's still in existence, let's make sure we make the best out of it, right? Hopefully this stats really help.
Yeah, and I think just to build on what Anthea and Rayner have said, and Sophie as well. So why is it that MPs can get away, elected MPs especially, can get away with not saying anything in Parliament, right? When that should be the bulk of a parliamentarian's job. I believe it says so in the job title, Member of Parliament, right? That you're supposed to speak in Parliament, right? But I guess it's how we as a society, but of course it's how the PAP has also defined the role of an MP, which the opposition has also played into, which is it's a town council manager, right? So whether you do things on the ground, right, it's seemingly more important than how much you speak in Parliament. And I guess that is also why NMPs are less popular amongst the general populace, and people do not really care about the NMPs as much as they care about the elected MPs, because for them what the MPs do on a constituency level is more tangible, right? Quote unquote, right? Whereas the meta thing is far away from them, far removed from them. But the meta contributions are actually even more, the macro interventions, they are far more consequential, right, than the next sheltered walkway, for instance, right? Like what laws are being passed and what, right? For instance, POFMA, just POFMA itself would be more consequential to the country than whether they are not mosquitoes. Maybe that's very consequential, but sheltered walkways, right? That's something that we can do without, right? Just get an umbrella. But it's how we it's how we have understood the role of MPs.
Yeah, very good point there. And it's an evolution, Walid, of also the electorate, right? And so we can't really be looking at the parliamentary schemes or institutions in silo away from what is the readiness, what's the electorate looking at, and of course the two feed into each other, right? If all that you see being raised by elected MPs are very municipal issues, and they're not obviously unimportant because it deals with daily living and needs. But I think it's actually having that balance, right? So hopefully over time, we will actually have residents going to NPS and want to talk to the MP about POFMA, about LGBTQ, about environment, about mental health, right? Instead of only just kind of the day-to-day, issues that they're dealing with. I think once we get there, then the MPs will naturally then be raising these issues in Parliament as well.
Absolutely agreed, because if there's no demand, there won't be supply, right? And if there is demand, there definitely will be supply, right? The MPs will definitely react to that. So thank you so much. So and Anthea is not only the one who has filed the most number of parliamentary questions per year, but she is also the one who got the most number of media mentions per year. And Siu Kam Hong is second and Walter is third, right? So, but with these questions, right? So Anthea, Kanwaljit, Walter, and Eugene calling out the quorum, right? Are these the exceptions? Because we've had what, 92, is it, NMPs?
97.
Is it 97 NMPs? So are these the exceptions or is this the norm? Or what's the average, as in from the data set that you guys have had, as in, because it seems to me that most Singaporeans do not know most of the NMPs. In fact, even the more informed Singaporeans, politically informed Singaporeans, right, would struggle to name all of the 9 NMPs in one particular parliamentary session, right? So what's your sense?
Rayner?
Okay, so like objectively, statistically, these are the exceptional ones, right? Statistically, right? You know, that's where their names pop out as like outliers for these graphs. I think one interesting thing around like media mentions is that if you look at like the 8th parliament, actually the bar is way on the right. So actually they in general, the 8th parliament had a lot more media mentions even than Anthea. But also I think that was when it was novel. You know, like there was a lot of media coverage for the scheme in general. That's why the whole batch got moved upwards towards a higher number of media mentions. But I would also argue that actually media mentions could probably be, you know, like up there as a function of, you know, how influential someone's, like, you know, just now we're talking about quantity versus quality, right?
Right.
I think like our PQ counting could be more quantity, but you
Right.
know, the media has that filter for us, right? So like by media mentions, you could also count that as, you know, perhaps that's a consideration when we think about quality.
Interesting. Okay. So that was your reasoning why you included media mentions, is it? Because you think that's a proxy for quality? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Also thought, just to add on, you know, including that was also a way of, you know, adding on to what is another way of contributing as NMPs, right? Because you talked about the meta issues. And the meta issues, you know, there is maybe a role of education, you know, where the citizenry and the public is concerned. So I think the media mentions could be a bit of a proxy of that in sort of putting out meta issues. So that was another consideration. But yeah, the qualitative aspect of it, of the quality of participation, certainly also came into the discussion as well.
Okay.
But can I add something very quick also,
Sure.
you know, around quality? Yeah. It's like, you know, like I think I subscribe to this whole idea that, you know, that NMPs can say the unvotables kind of like things, right? You know, and that's the thing that I find that, you know, resonates the most with me. And, you know, like even though the wider population might not know that particular NMP, you know, I feel that if it means something to a population that is marginalized, that, you know, that has fewer avenues for, you know, like articulating their needs, you know, like I think that means the world to them, you know. So when we think about quality, you know, I also want to think about, you know, how like someone's speech in parliament, when you tell that person in their community, you know, this is what they're talking about you, you know, and your needs. I think it really makes a world of a difference.
Oh, I agree. And in fact, at that time, I didn't know Anthea personally yet. And the thing that really stood out for me was when she, during her time, was her mentioning Rohingyas in parliament, right? And this is 95 to 98% of Singaporeans don't know and don't. It's not an important issue to them. Like even POVMA is important to some segment of Singaporeans, right? But when she brought that, I really like that. So and I mean, it meant a lot to me, and I'm sure it meant a lot to the Rohingyans, right? Whether it results in something is a different matter. But so just to buttress your point, Rayner, absolutely. So I just wanted to mention also when we talk about Section 377A, and I mentioned this in my paper, which you guys cited, and thank you so much. It's not just Siu Kam Hong who was the NMP who was pro-repeal. It was Professor Teo Lee An, the NMP, who was very much against repeal. And so this is the thing. If even elected MPs who believe what she believes, right? They would never say it in that way, right? It's only the NMPs that can. And I'm sure she's not the only one who believes that, right? Whatever she said, especially at that time. But the rest of them, even when they were saying we should retain, right? They were couching it in terms of societal readiness and not in a strong way that she did. So it goes both ways, I suppose, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure Professor Teo would say she was representing a sizable amount of Singaporeans as well. Yeah.
Yeah. That was actually a really interesting exchange. So again, another good read on Teo Lian. I actually invited her too. Actually, I didn't get a response, and I don't know whether that's the right address. But I thought it'd be interesting to get her, to share from kind of a different perspective. You're right. I think the way she was being really vivid in her description. Yeah. I mean, it made quite a number of them squirm. Was what I was.
Yeah. I was thinking there's no way that speech would have been given in 2022, right? Like, there's no way, like, honestly, like, I mean, you just look at someone. But anyway, so let's leave it at that. But I'm really glad to hear, Anthea, that you invited her to. I think it's really consistent with your desire for intellectual diversity, and I really appreciate that, because I think sometimes people on the more liberal side, they tend to shut off ideas from people, and I think it goes nowhere. I think more engagement, more conversation would be helpful. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So we've already gone beyond 1 hour. So sorry, but just final question, okay? Because how Anthea ended her speech was basically how during the book launch was the message she wanted to send through the book as well, right? Yours was the concluding chapter, and instead of asking unelected voices still necessary in Parliament, you said, let's flip the question and ask, are elected voices enough? So what do you think in 2022? Because some of your own authors clearly believe that the scheme, elected voices are now enough because you have enough opposition MPs. So all three of you, so I think Anthea is lifting the party whip, right? So Rayner and so,
what party are we?
so what do you guys think? Are elected voices enough?
Let's hear from Sophie and Rayner first, and then I will
and then
because I saw my chapter already, so
yeah.
Sorry, can you guys hear me? I never know if the tech gods are. Yeah. Wow. Gosh. Honestly, I'm really torn about this because I think, like, and Anthea spoke a bit about this earlier, right? Well, we all have, right, that NMPs, the need to like toe the party line, or the imposition of the whip, or just the need to get votes, often stops a lot of really important issues from being raised by elected MPs, right? That said, I do also agree with, I think, a number of contributors who raised this, that it's also very difficult to talk about the NMP scheme sort of in isolation without also looking at, like broader changes to Singapore's political landscape, right? People have talked about growing opposition presence, just the nature of how we think about parliamentary debate. Can we approach it in a more nuanced way, so it's not just for or against an issue on the whole. I don't know if this really answers your question, but no, I think one thing that really stood out to me as you were working on the book, right, and in reading the contributor essays, was that we can talk until the cows come home about the accountability issue and whether NMPs deserve their place in Parliament. Are they because they're not elected, and so on and so forth. But I think the core of what we were trying to get at, right, was asking, what actually do we want out of our Parliament?
Right.
Right? what sort of people, what sort of people, what sort of issues do we think they should be raising? Who should they be accountable to? You know, what can we do to encourage better participation, right, and interaction between between civil society, between just, you know, regular people who are not maybe that interested in politics, with the parliamentarians, right? So for me, I think it's not, you know, just about our elected MPs enough, our NMPs a good counterbalance, you know, but what on the whole is enough, and what more do we need to do? Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I think you did answer the question, and I think that's really, it goes back to the, I mean, you mentioned two things, right? One is the higher objectives of Parliament, right? What it's supposed to do, and secondly is the context. What is the context that we are living in? It's not just assessing whether the NMP is democratic, undemocratic, elitist or unelitist, but within this context, what it does. So thank you. Really appreciate that answer. Rayner?
Wow, I think it deserves a whole essay. Like,
It does.
like,
It does.
it's complex, and like, I think to cut a long story short, I totally agree with Sophie. Like, I think even if you think about some of the essays, like for me, I guess my short answer is, for as long as a particular intent can be conflated with political gain, I think, like, having elected MPs is not enough. Because I feel that there are some views that, might not be given its weight in Parliament, because they might be fielded by elected MPs. And, for me, at least this is my impression of political discourse sometimes, at least. So I think definitely a lot more complex than this answer. I want to caveat, but that's my immediate thought.
Okay, thank you. So, two no's already. Elected voices are not enough. so, so I suppose it's 3 for 3, Anthea.
Well, I ended the book, with the including chapter possibilities with a question for good reason, right? This is not a this is not necessarily an issue that has a model answer, and I think I shared this at the book launch as well. The future we're going into, the way we have evolved, society become more educated, more each wanting more participation, with increasing contestation, and that's contestation, but also polarization. Those are all the different factors coming in that's going to determine why should parliament that we deserve, right? And we often talk about you get the government that you deserve, but I also would extend it to say that we get the parliament, and if we don't ask the questions, we don't push for review, then we'll just prod along the same way, just like the NMP scheme has prodded along for 32 years with minimal changes, right? Very incremental changes to it, from 2 to 9, from being a non-permanent feature to a permanent feature in Parliament. And those are the only two big changes in 32 years. So why are we so sort of like, passive and wanting, with the pace of the world and life that we have, why are we kind of just, letting things just go organically instead of coming forward and proactively asking the question and doing reviews and having consultation on this kind of big, and not on things on the ground. Right? Hear me, because I'm very. So I think, as I said, I think we need to ask questions beyond what we know as theoretical models of governance, right? The majoritarian democracy, there's the proportional first past the post, what we have, and the proportional representation, and there's pros and cons, benefits, and all of that. But then how about thinking beyond that, right? And there is opportunity with the NMP. It doesn't have to be forever, so we don't have to continue to binary discourse. It's not democratic, it's it's very much right at the polls, but how do we then look at what in the evolving emerging future that we actually embrace, right? What would a parliament that's more balanced like? Given the kind of world that we're going into and the needs that we have as a society, and in my chapter, I did sort of throw out the possibility if we have 3 branches of government, can we also have 3 branches of parliament?
Parliament.
So that's we have seen the partisan ills around the world in mature democracies, right? And the 2-party system. In my view, the way it has evolved, it's not actually what we want as a people.
Agreed.
It's crippling, it's polarizing, and it's not moving us forward. It's very divisive. So I think those are a lot of questions that we need to ask. No one has the answer, but I think everyone has a part of the answer. So it's important that we have this sort of, and I hope the book can.
Right. Thank you so much. So I think the line that stood out the most to me from your answer, which was full of pearls of wisdom, was you get the parliament you deserve, right? And if there's no engagement, then you cannot expect things to change, right? So thank you so much. I'll end with a quote from your final chapter where you said, "There is no greater honor than to serve my country and humanity, and no greater privilege than to serve this way as a member of the 13th Parliament." And I really think that is true. I think that's the highest, other than, maybe playing at the World Cup for Singapore or something. I really think that is the highest honor and highest contribution a person can make to the country. So thank you for your contribution in Parliament, and thank you for your contribution, this one. So for scholars and students of Singapore politics, but also for Singaporeans in general. Thank you to all 3 of you, and thank you for coming on tonight. It's 1 hour 15 minutes already, so I think it's past my bedtime for sure. Past Anthea says so. Okay. Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay.
Everyone, Walid.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Walid.
Bye bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.